Hello and good evening. My name is Brian Lewis. Welcome to the Spin Zone. Welcome back for week 2. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button below. There'll be more. So this week so far, I had a couple different things I wanted to touch into. However, I wanted to go over the football week that was, because there was a wild week of college football. That I got to catch some of the games on Saturday. NFL on Sunday was tidbit worthy. I'll say that. Very tidbit worthy. So I'm starting with Cal and Pittsburgh. Now, these are just the top 25 matchups that I'm going to touch on first. First of all, Pitt and Cal. Pitt's like a top 20 program right now. They're top 20 in the country, but have consistently like good team in the ACC. They were a former Big East school. That's how I remember them. But as far as Pitt goes, they beat Cal 17-15. Cal's in their first year in the ACC, so that's incredibly fascinating from that point of view, to see the adjustment from some of the West Coast schools. Purdue and Illinois, that's a Big Ten battle. Illinois is in the top 25, which is very weird because I remember the days of like Juice Williams and Rashad Mendenhall, obviously. They had a good pass rusher too on those teams, I forget his name. However, that game was 50-49 and it went to overtime. Then there was Alabama, South Carolina. Now Alabama lost to Vanderbilt the week before. So the South Carolina game being crazy with 100,000 people at Bryant-Denny Stadium, that's not good. Not at all. The Red River Shootout was a blowout. Texas crushed Oklahoma. Oklahoma's just not very good right now. BYU trampled Arizona. Georgia escaped from Mississippi State. I would say Mississippi State is a solid competition. Florida and Tennessee. Tennessee beat them in overtime. LSU beat Ole Miss in overtime. Oregon beat Ohio State in a very hard-fought victory. I think there's a point I'm going to make with, I'm going to do a whole separate video on Ohio State and Oregon, because that game proves a result that I think in a different time we would never have seen that result. Like 10 years ago when they played in the national title game, Marcus Mariota's happy feet is what ultimately cost them that game. The lack of physicality from Oregon up front is what cost them that game. Dan Lanning Mario Cristobal was also there, so I also think he had a success. I would say by good standard he was a successful coach as well at Oregon. But Dan Lanning was the perfect hire for Oregon, and he's taken them to the next level. Very, very good, big congratulations. However, more to talk about that game in a second here. Iowa State beat West Virginia on the road. Kansas State beat Colorado. Now, Colorado impressed. That's the best Colorado have looked against good competition in a while. Boise State crushed Hawaii as they traveled all the way to the island for that one. And I don't think I saw too many other crazy results. Liberty had to go to OT to beat Florida International. Liberty are a squad that has some talent there. Let's see, UNLV continue to win. They beat Utah State. Arizona State beat Utah. Cam Rising got hurt. We'll see what happens if he's going to play again next year for like a ninth season. North Carolina lost to Georgia Tech. You almost have to ask questions about what's going to happen with Mac Brown at this point. Let's see, Cincinnati UCF, 1913 Cincinnati. Just a lot of really close competitive games down the stretch here that intrigued me. Nevada, Oregon State was 42-37. Kentucky Vanderbilt was close. That was a one-score game. Minnesota UCLA was a one-score game. Granted, both those teams probably aren't very good. NC State and Syracuse. Syracuse 24-17. Kyle McCord also continues to look good. So this will touch into my next point with Ohio State. So the Buckeyes here, talented squad. No, the whole $20 million roster thing, miss me with that bullshit. This is major college sports. This is the way of life. unfortunately. That's just how it is. Where I'm at with the Buckeyes is, you look at that roster. You have the 2 running backs with Jenkins and Henderson, and then you also have other depth there as well. You have the receiving core with the freshman Jeremiah Smith, who's impressed. You have that defense who have a lot of guys coming back. Denzel Burke among them, Tyreek Williams among them, Jack Sawyer among them, JT Tamalu among them. And then they have Caleb Downs from Alabama. You brought in Sean McPherson, right at the center from Alabama. So you brought in all of these guys. They still looked good in that game. I mean, I don't think Ohio State played that bad. I think Oregon, ultimately, it's one of those games where you're a top 5 matchup. It's 50-50 whether you're going to win or lose. As far as I'm concerned, there's no excuses for Ohio State. But as far as I'm concerned, they didn't really lay a goose egg. They didn't look bad in the loss. And overall, like, that's... Considering they were on the road, they were up. You know, they had a chance to win the game in the end. That's good. That's as much as you can ask for. Now Ryan Day is going to be under a lot of pressure because had they won the Michigan game any one of the last 2 years, I don't think there would be as much pressure on him. But the pressure's on for Ryan Day. And Urban Meyer winning that national championship 10 years ago also puts a lot of pressure because they're looking at it as we should be able to compete with this modern era. Which, look, at Michigan winning a national title last year also ramps up the pressure as well. So there's a lot of different things going on at Ohio State right now. Chip Kelly's offense is not the problem. Jim Knowles' defense, there's a lot of talk amongst Ohio State fans about, like, oh, is this defense going to deliver? It did deliver. It gave you a chance to win the game. You literally were against a top 5 team that's also competing national championship contender. If they were in a different conference, you wouldn't play them until the playoff time. This was a playoff type of game. Now, with an expanded playoff, all you really need to do is make sure that you're in the top 6. That's the way I would look at it from Ohio State's standpoint. You get into that top 6 range, you're going to do some damage. That's where I feel like it's going to work out for them. Now, looking at the games for this week, the big ones. Oregon are going to play Purdue. Oregon playing Purdue is so weird. The Big Ten is just so weird. Auburn and Missouri. Clemson and Virginia. Clemson in the top 10 still is crazy. Indiana being 16th for the country against Nebraska. Miami and Louisville. Michigan and Illinois, both teams at the 22nd and 24th ranking. Alabama at Tennessee at Neyland Stadium. Navy and Army are both ranked. Navy's playing Charlotte. LSU plays Arkansas at Razorback Stadium. Georgia and Texas. Ooh, yes. Georgia versus Texas, man. If Oregon, Ohio State wasn't your flavor, Georgia, Texas is about to be your flavor. Quinn Ewers this is the game. If you're going to solidify yourself as a top quarterback prospect, this is the game Quinn Ewers needs to go off. This will also be the game he's going to show if he's healthy. Iowa State's number 9 in the country. That's bonkers too. And then SMU against Stanford. I'm going to go down the picks here. Auburn, Missouri. I mean, Auburn are not a bad team. They're just in a retooling phase. They're constant 3 years in a cloud of rebuilding. I'm going to go with Missouri in that one, although that BC game leaves me a little concerned for Missouri. We'll go Clemson against Virginia. Indiana will beat Nebraska. Miami over Louisville. I would pick Army against East Carolina. Georgia Tech are pretty solid. So, and Notre Dame, depends how they play. Considering Notre Dame. Georgia Tech at home. Let's see how that happens. Especially in Atlanta. Yeah, that's going to be a tough. I'm going to go Georgia Tech in the upset. Michigan, Illinois. I'm going to go with Michigan on the road. I think their veteran leadership is going to pull out in that game. There's going to be a lot of pressure on them to win that game. Alabama on the road against Tennessee. I'm going to pick Alabama, although Tennessee at home. But, man, I still have that recollection of Terrence Cody blocking that field goal at the end of the 2009 matchup, or 2008 matchup. A&M, Mississippi State. I'm going to pick A&M to win that game. Although you can go for $5. Damn. I need to go down there. Starkville. LSU, Arkansas, LSU. Kansas State, West Virginia. I'm going to go with Kansas State. Georgia, Texas. I'm going to save the Georgia-Texas game for last. Iowa State should beat UCF. SMU should beat Stanford. Georgia, Texas is going to be crazy. A lot of NFL prospects. I think Texas wins. I think they solidify themselves as the true #1 team in the country. It's crazy seeing Texas back in this form, the way they did. It's a talented team. 2 good quarterbacks, too. Which is just, it sets the table for Georgia to kind of fall into that area where we have to look into that schedule, because 2 losses now puts, and keep in mind with Texas being in the SEC, that puts Georgia 2 losses. And I think that kind of takes them out of the SEC contention with 2 losses, because how are you going to presume that Alabama could lose again. Tennessee could have 2 losses at the end of the week. LSU could have 2 losses. Texas is just tearing up the competition right now. And Georgia still has to play Ole Miss at Ole Miss. Man. They'll have a bye week after this, so they only got a little time to recoup. But they just played Mississippi State. And they won by 10. So, I mean, this is where I think Carson Beck not taking that next step has hurt Texas. So that's something I'm gonna pick. For Georgia, So I'm gonna pick Texas, but for Georgia, that's gonna be a tough position to be in. But kudos to Oregon. Gets a good win coming from this Buckeye fan. And the next segment's going to be all basketball. Well, we're going to go, actually, before we go basketball, we're going to do the NFL.